Okay, good evening. Do you all survive your Philippians, or most of you? You guys look a little more subdued tonight, so I'll see if I can change that. Any questions about what we talked about last night before we change gears a little bit? I was thinking after I was done speaking, I forgot to leave out I left out a couple of the themes of existentialism. Like I was telling you, it's really hard to define, but another reason it's hard to define is another theme of existentialism is it rejects labels and categories. And that's something I also really appreciate about that sort of philosophy. It's like, don't label me, don't just say you're some white bearded gnome. I want to be known as Fred. Don't just label me as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant or any of that. And think about the labels because once people label you, they don't have to deal with you as an individual or as a person. They can just put you in their neat little category. And we label people all the time, but once you do that, you really can't. It's really a way of objectifying someone and really not getting to know them as a person. And I think you can see how Jesus would constantly cut through that stuff in his ministry and go right to the heart of people, not based on their gender or their nationality or things of that nature, but he would go right to the heart of their issue and what their need was. And so that's another thing I like about existentialism that I forgot to mention. Yes?
Last night you kept mentioning, or you didn't keep mentioning, you mentioned it like 3 times, freedom within the sovereignty of God.
Yes.
I was a little confused on that concept. Do you think you could
Yes. But that's involved. So if you ask me,
I'll ask you another time.
maybe I'm still trying to debate. I think I'm going to change up the grill a little bit tomorrow because I don't like it. I'll maybe let you ask 5 questions, like real questions, not form questions, like things you really care about or interested about, and I'll answer them as honestly as I can. But then I'll try to deal with questions like that. And I was thinking of maybe talking a little bit about the dark night of the soul as well tomorrow.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other question? But don't forget, because it's important. Any other questions about existentialism or that talk? Okay. Well, okay, we can, tonight, for your philosophical and religious pleasure, I'm going to talk about a project I've been working on probably for the last 7 years or so, and it's called The Dead Have No Need of Ethics. And Graham was telling me a couple of you have actually read my blog, which really surprised me. I thought it was just some obscure little things that hermits with internet connection would look into. But for those of you that read it, hopefully it won't be horribly redundant for you. The benefit is you're going to get to hear me present it instead of just in print form or digital form. And then I'm going to field questions on it at the end. And I want to see how this affects you and makes you feel. So let me pray for you. That should concern you that I'm going to pray for you but this, I don't know, this is like my thought baby that I've been trying. I'm like so impregnated with this concept and idea, but I can't bring it fully to birth. And so this is part of the birthing process tonight, so you can all help me. And I hope it challenges you and helps you, and it honestly could change your life. And this is what changed my life, and I want to share it with other people. So let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for these people and this place and all of those who've come before and who will come after. May we be present in this time together with each other, and may these not just be words and empty ideas, but may they affect our very hearts and souls and quicken our spirits. I ask in Jesus' name, amen. Okay. So this project I've been working on, it's called The Dead Have No Need of Ethics. And this is like a prolegomena. I'm actually working on an ethics book. And I've been teaching ethics for over 20 years now. And in the beginning, and I was going to start, and some of you talked about, I don't know if it was last year, but I gave a talk on ethics where I put up the word good on the board. So instead of truth, I think our first talk was, what does it mean when we say the word good? And it's a curious thing about the word good because it's something we use every day. And we'll talk about like, man, that was a really good lunch today, or those were really good rice bowls, or that was really good ginger chicken, or I have a really good girlfriend, or that was a good book, or a good movie, or God is good. And it becomes really bizarre when we start to think, well, what exactly does good mean if we're talking about God, our girlfriend, and a rice bowl, right? It's really a bizarre concept. And so what I challenge people to do is to think about, what do you mean when you say the word good? And what I've discovered over my years of teaching ethics, if I can get someone to tell me what they mean by the word good, I can predict what their ethical theory is or their ethical code of conduct. It's like prophetic. It's really freaky. And because based on how you define good, it is going to set a trajectory for your life and your values. And people have all different sorts of ideas of good. Like if you talk about it's a good hamburger, you probably mean it's pleasurable. Or if you have a good girlfriend, maybe she's kind and supportive or loyal. If you have a good boyfriend, maybe he's a good provider or protector or leader. If you have a good God, maybe he's someone you can trust or you feel under his care and protection. And so we have all these different ways of defining good. Some people would define good, what God says is good, what God prohibits is evil. And that's what we would call divine command theory. People who say pleasure is good, pain is evil, that's a hedonist. People who say what's good for me is good, what's bad for me is bad, that's an egoist. And so you see the point I'm getting at. How you define good is going to tell me a lot about you. But as I've been teaching ethics, I don't know, I've been fascinated by these different theories, but I always felt a sense that something was lacking. And I'm going to mix this up a little bit. I'm going to read little sections, and then I'm going to just talk and expand on them. So bear with me. I don't normally like to read to people, but if you'll go through this and give me some feedback, I would appreciate it. All right. I've taught ethics at the college level for over 20 years and have wrestled with and expounded upon a host of ethical theories and perspectives. Perhaps I too have been affected by the postmodern zeitgeist of our age. Okay, was that obnoxious? All my friends and family, whenever I try to read them my stuff, they're just like, would you please just use words that people can understand? But postmodern, that's that, remember we talked about last night, that's that rejection of formulas. We're not baking cookies here. It's not like you can just measure in 4 cups of goodness, 2 tablespoons of truth, and bake it at 375 for an hour. We're talking about people and real lives. And it's not so neat and clear cut. It's a lot messier. And that's part of what I mean by this postmodern thing. And what I've noticed in a lot of ethical theories in the past is they're very formulaic. Like if you do A, B, and C, then D, E, and F will follow. And you'll hear that all the time. You'll see people write books like in counseling or raising adolescents or teens, and they'll be like, here's the way to raise a godly teen, or here's the way to have a healthy marriage. And they'll give you all these, and I'm not saying they're bad, but they'll give you these really practical steps, and they're implying that if you follow these steps, then everything will turn out rosy. But that is often not the case. You have parents that love Jesus, they do everything right for their children, and their children turn out to be hellspawn. Or you could be the most loving wife in the world, you could be like a servant to your husband, you could call him Lord, and he might just be a filthy pig and disrespects you, and you might pray for him every night, be submissive to his rule and authority in the home, and he just will not turn around. And the same thing, you could have a wife where you do everything for her, but she can never be pleased or satisfied, even though you've laid down your life for her like Christ did for the church. And so that's part of what really started to gnaw at me about these different ethical theories is they had these really neat formulas or ideas, but there was always some sort of flaw. And zeitgeist, that's just a fancy word that means spirit of the age. And so every age or generation has like certain themes or things that sort of drives them. Like your grandparents' generation or your great-grandparents, they called them the Great Generation. That they went through a couple world wars, through the Depression, they worked hard, they had a strong work ethic. And then you had the boomers, then you had like the Generation X, and I think they're calling you guys the millennials or something like that. So they have a lot of bad things to say about you. But they do that with every generation. Every generation before acts like, oh, what has gone wrong with this generation? And I'm sure you'll think the same thing of the people that come after you. But this idea is, it's true. I'm not satisfied with just taking the ethical theories from the past and expecting them to work in the 21st century. And so I began to think, well, maybe it's not an either or, like I have to be a Kantian or a divine command theorist or an ethicist of care or something like that, but maybe I could take bits and pieces, maybe a little existential ethics here and a little divine command theory there, and I could make this hybrid ethical theory in which I could live out my life. And ethics, for those of you that don't know, it's the philosophical study of right conduct. So ethics is the theory of right conduct. Morality is putting that theory into practice. So when we talk about someone's ethics, it's kind of like the ideals or values that guide their lives. And when we talk about whether or not someone is moral, usually what we mean, like if we say, oh, that girl is so immoral, what I probably mean by that is she is not living up to my ethical standards. She might very well be living up to her ethical standards and guidelines, but she's not living up to mine. So in a lot of ways, you could say ethics would be equivalent to like someone who goes to college and studies culinary arts, and morality is the cook, the fry cook in the kitchen actually making the pancakes and the fried eggs. They're putting it into practice. And so that's kind of the distinction there. But even my hybrid theories fell short, and I finally realized that I was an unbeliever in ethical systems and solutions as to how to determine the right way to live. I realized that ethics, like religion, were all human constructs and attempts to come to terms with how to reconcile ourselves to the good life or to God. Unfortunately, all ethical and religious systems are developed by finite, fallible creatures, and because of these limitations, we could never satisfy the eternal, infallible desire that we feel inside of ourselves to be in right relationship with God. And so here I was, this professor of ethics and religion at a Christian college, no less, and I come to the realization after teaching them for 5-10 years that I don't even believe in them, which I thought was quite ironic, personally. And even to this day, I don't know if the administration at my school realizes I'm like an ethical agnostic. I don't believe in ethics. And you can go down to the next picture. I have this like weird love-hate relationship with philosophy and religion. Religion intrigues me, and I'm just like addicted to like studying about different religions and their practices, their traditions, their rituals, because they all have these really unique ways, whether we're talking about Buddhists or Muslims or Jews or Christians and different sects within those communities, of how to reconnect to God or the infinite or the one or whatever they want to call it. But the downside is all those traditions are also very manipulative, controlling, deceitful, and they just indoctrinate the adherents that come through their doors. And they really try to put all this pressure to conform to their worldview. And kind of like we were talking about Nietzsche last night, this will to power, like all these different groups and religions and philosophies are trying to get you to buy in to their idea of truth. And if you're like an independent thinker or individually minded, that's really kind of repulsive to you because you don't want to get put into this little mold. I went to this college. It was actually where I was born. And I decided to make a full circle, and I wanted to go back to my roots. And this college was in the Deep South, and the reason I went there is because it was billed as the most conservative college in America, the most fundamentalist college. And I had been living with the beautiful people, the hippies in the mountains of California, and so I was way over here to the left, and I decided for balance in my life, I wanted to go as far right as I could. And so I went to this school, and I soon found out that they actually had, it was called Bob Jones University, and they actually had Bob Jones days at the other colleges in South Carolina where the students would dress up to look like Bob Jones students, and they called it the Sausage Factory. And the reason they called it the Sausage Factory is because the students just got cranked out like little link sausages, and they all looked the same and all tasted the same and thought the same and believed the same. And believe it or not, after going to Bob Jones for a year and a half, they told me that I was welcome to stay, but there was no way in God's heaven that they were ever going to give me a diploma. I said, well, that would be kind of pointless to keep coming here. Then they said, probably. And so I fled the Bob Jonesians and came back to California. But that's the thing is, I appreciated them. I loved what they had to offer. I loved their devotion. I thought they had a very good understanding of the scriptures. But coupled with that was this weird subculture of all these like legalism and these extra biblical rules and procedures, and not all of them, don't get me wrong, there were some very godly people there, but for many of, especially the young people, they just were so judgmental and self-righteous, and I was among them. I mean, it really kind of fed your ego because you could gain so much status based on the way you lived and how righteous your life was and how you could appear before your peers and the people in the church. So even though I was repulsed by the limitations, arrogance, dogmatism, legalism, and deception of religion, I was by no means a nihilist or an anarchist or an atheist, far from it. But the more I learned, the more fascinated and alienated I became with ethics and religion. It was like seeing a philosophical, theological train wreck about to happen and not being able to look away. But there was one thing for certain. I knew I did not want to be on that train. And so I bailed. I just got off that train. Religion provides the most basic answers to the human condition, like, why am I here? Where did I come from? What's the meaning of life? What happens to me when I die? Yet religion, like ethics, has a variety of answers and solutions to these very human questions. But how are we supposed to know which religion has the truth? I mean, have you ever thought about that question? If you were brought up in Pakistan, do you really have any belief that you would not be a Muslim today? I mean, why wouldn't you be? If you were brought up from the cradle to your 20s or however old you are right now, why in the world would you consider another religion? It doesn't make any sense. Or if you were brought up in a Hindu nation or a Buddhist nation, or if you were raised by secular humanist parents, I mean, do you still think that you would know Jesus? Or is the reason you know Jesus is because you were taught about Jesus ever since you were little, and you learned about Jesus just like you learned the sky is blue and grass is green. And it's just as much true to you as anything else your parents told you. And if you haven't begun asking yourself those questions, now is probably a good time. And I'm going to try to help you work through those. I had been enculturated as a Christian. Do you guys know what enculturated means? Okay. Oh, that's good. If I say a word you don't know what it means, just someone throw up your hand. And don't be embarrassed because there'll be more people that don't know. Enculturated, it's what your culture does to you. We're all brought up within a culture. They teach you your language. They teach you what is food. They teach you what's modest. They teach you what is valuable, what has worth. And so all of us have been brought up in cultures, and most of us have even been brought up. So we have the overarching American culture, and American values are things like liberty, the American dream, the pursuit of health, wealth, happiness. I mean, those sorts of things. But life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, those are big American ideals. This concept of freedom, and being an individual and having choice, those are huge American values. But then you were probably brought up in a subculture, and America has thousands of subcultures. It could be like surfers or evangelical Christians or charismatics or Muslim communities, but Muslim Americans. And they all have their special sub-rules. Like in my subculture, we were fundamentalist Baptist, and so we had a whole different set of rules than the society at large. We were still Americans, but that is not where our ultimate allegiance lay. It was to Jesus and the heavenly kingdom, and then as long as the American culture did not contradict those values, we would go along with them. But if American society values ever challenged what we believed were God's values, we would be happy to be persecuted for disobeying those laws. So that's kind of what enculturation is. Okay. I had an inherited belief in God that I got from my parents, Jesus and the Bible, from my earliest memories. Yet when I reached my late teens, and like I mentioned last night, it was probably about the time my frontal lobes began to attach. I began to think more abstractly, and I began to ask questions that it had never occurred to me to ask before, like, how do we know there's a God again? Or why do we believe the Bible is more inspired or more true than any other book? Or why is our particular branch of Christianity true and we can't fellowship with the Foursquare people down the church or the Catholics or the Lutherans or the Methodists? In fact, we were so separatistic and exclusive that the churches I grew up in, at least as a child, I might have misunderstood, but I really got the impression that we were the last true believers and everyone else had fallen out of the way. That was at least the impression I got. And even though we moved a lot, my dad was always able to find those types of believers wherever he went. And so he found those sorts of believers to fellowship with. But we were very much into separation. We wouldn't fellowship with people who had false doctrine or who fellowship with people who had false doctrine. So I called it like a second and third degree of separation. Even like the good people at Liberty University, we weren't allowed to hang out with them because they were neo-fundamentalist. And a neo-fundamentalist, even though they had correct fundamental doctrine and took the scripture seriously and were orthodox, they hung out with neo-evangelicals. And even though neo-evangelicals had sound doctrine, they hung out with neo-orthodox, that's where it started to get a little iffy. And the neo-orthodox would hang out with anyone. And so we couldn't even hang out with the neo-fundamentalists because they hung out with people who hung out with people who hung out with people we shouldn't be hanging out with. So it got very involved. And it gave you kind of this like bastion mentality, like put up the walls, protect yourselves from the world, come out from amongst them, be a separate and holy people. And that's how I would kind of describe the difference, at least between the brand of fundamentalism I was brought up in. It was more of a fortress mentality, like the line is drawn here, no compromise, where I see evangelicals as more wanting to be like salt and light out into the community. But as often happens, it gets blurred, and often it's like, well, are you evangelizing the world or have you become the world? And it becomes a very tricky balancing act for a lot of churches. And you especially see that in like the emergent church movement and things of that nature, where they're very effective at reaching the world, but it's like, where did the gospel go? Or do you even know what the gospel is anymore? And I'm not trying to pick on anyone in particular, it's just everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, and the fundamentalists were very good at not being tainted by the things of the world, but they could be very weak at connecting or reaching the world. All right. So when I began to ask these questions to my youth pastors and my parents and other church leaders, I don't know, the answers weren't very helpful. In fact, some of the answers actually made me very uncomfortable. Like when I would ask things like, the people that canonized the book of the Bible, that decided which book should go in the Bible and which book shouldn't go into the Bible, I asked my Bible college teacher this. I said, were they inspired like the people that wrote the Bible? And he said, don't be stupid, of course not. And I said, well, then why do we believe they picked the right books? What if they got the wrong books? What if there's some book that didn't get added in the Bible that says, and yea, after all these things, thou shalt bow towards Jerusalem 3 times a day and say this prayer to God on high, and thou shalt be saved. And so I was freaking out. I was like, if it's like, let's vote on it, like which books we want in the Bible and which we don't, but it's not being done by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, that was really disturbing to me, even as a very young man. And I did not like those answers, but that was a better answer than, Fred, we don't ask those kind of questions, and you shouldn't either. And of course, those I would always flag, be like, return to this question later, make sure to ask that one again. And unfortunately, I started getting more and more of those red flagged questions where we don't talk about it. We don't ask those sort of questions. Or why do you have to think so much? Or why can't you just believe? Or why can't you just be happy like everyone else? And it's just like, because I want to know. I mean, I don't want to follow something that turns up to be just something that you guys made up as you're going along. And so what eventually happened was the answers I received from my religious community led me to even greater questions and deeper doubts. These questions became magnified when I left the sheltered garden of my youth and entered the wide and wild world of men. Things were not as I had been led to believe, and this brought me anxiety, anger, fear, and dread. Remember that? Angst, existential angst. So my existential journey had begun even before I knew what existentialism was, and I was full of all these things. And at this point in my life, I considered myself an agnostic. And I don't know if this is confusing. I'm trying to explain how I got to my place teaching ethics, but I've gone back to my youth to explain this journey I was taking. Yes, go ahead. Yes, the Fred of my youth is not the Fred you see before you today. But he is, and he isn't. Paradoxes. Okay. So now I considered myself an agnostic. I studied the arguments of atheists and philosophical naturalists, materialists, and those are people that believe only the physical world exists. All that we really know is true is matter. And a philosophical naturalist is someone who believes that every phenomena, everything you can experience with the senses can be explained in a natural way. Even things like love, fear, hope, emotions are just boiled down to chemical reactions in the brain. Love is really nothing more than addiction, like smoking cigarettes or wanting sweets. And we all have these different psychological addictions, and we reinforce them, but it really can come down to a chemical reaction. And so I studied these people, and even though I thought it was fascinating, and I learned a lot about human psychology and physiology, it was so empty. It was like one-dimensional life. It was just flat, because all I was now was just kind of like this bio machine, and they didn't even believe I had a soul or a spirit, or even a mind for that matter. I had a brain that was having chemical reactions, and I was just like responding to the stimuli in my environment. And I didn't even have any free will or choice. It was just like a program based on my genetics and my environment equaled what I would do. Like from wearing this orange shirt to growing a beard, to however I respond to the questions you ask me. It's not a choice or freedom, it's just a reaction based on, almost like dominoes. Someone, in nature, the Big Bang went and it just started the string of dominoes, and I'm kicking off more dominoes, and that's all there is to it, and I couldn't change it if I wanted to. And so even though I looked at this, I never could really consider myself a full-blown atheist, because when I would look at the world, at the galaxies and the wildflowers, I could just see design. I mean, I could never get past this idea, that argument from design, because I could see it in seashells and the human eye and thumbprints, and I just felt there had to be some sort of designer to put these things together. I just couldn't imagine that this was all random chance. But what I didn't know was whether this designer or God or creator or architect or whatever you wanted to call him cared about his universe, or if he was just kind of like this watchmaker that wound it up, put laws of nature there, and now we're running down, and everything's falling apart through entropy. And I certainly didn't think God cared about me. I mean, I felt no sense of presence of God in my life, which was so strange, because as a child, I was a true believer as far as I could tell. I mean, I'd sing the little Sunday school songs. I loved Jesus. I thought I felt the Holy Spirit within me. But now I was just thinking, wow, was that even real? Or was that just to please my parents, or so I could get the ribbons in my Bible, or the gold star for saying my memory verse? And it became really confusing to me. And I was really second guessing and questioning those acts I did as a child, and thinking, wow, I don't even know if that was even my beliefs or just the beliefs of my community and my people. So I called myself at this stage a seeker. And I like that because it sounded kind of romantic and like a little troubadour. And I was a seeker for truth. And I was going to look under every stone and behind every tree and see if I could find God. And this is when I began to study other philosophies and religions. I wanted to see what their take on it was and what their truth was. And instead of it helping me, though, it paralyzed me, because now I had all these competing perspectives from idealists and realists and Buddhists and Hindus and Jews and Mormons and Methodists and Baptists. And I was just like, how am I supposed to tell which is real? They all make very convincing claims. They all have true believers. And am I just a product of my culture? Did I just believe that particular flavor of truth because that's how I was brought up? And that seemed to be more and more likely to me. So I decided I was going to keep searching or die trying. And this is a poem I wrote during those dark days. I don't know if it's a good poem, but it meant a lot to me. I thought it was profound. And it's called The Loner. Silence is his friend, loneliness his brother. His ways are like the wind. He will touch but won't be tied to another. He feels without touching. His smile is in his eyes. It's hard to cling to nothing, much easier to grasp a lie. No answers to his endless quest, no solace only thoughts contest. No road can lead his soul to rest, save the silent path of death. And what I didn't know at the time when I wrote that, I mean, I was in this deep, deep despair. Everything was so black and gray, and I was so cynical. I didn't trust anyone. I figured everyone had an ulterior motive and angle. But it was out of this place of darkness and brokenness and deconstruction means where you just start to pull apart all the pieces of your life and to see, like, how do I work this? What is this doing here? Why is this part of my value system? And so I basically deconstructed my life to the best of my ability, almost like taking a whiteboard of everything I believed, all my truth, all my values, all my inherited beliefs, and I just tried to wipe it clean. And I know none of us can do that completely, but to the best of my ability, I just went through and tried to get rid of all those sort of presuppositions in my life. I wanted to start with like clean eyes. I mean, and I know you can't do that, but I did my best. But it was out of this place of brokenness that I heard God call my name. And I might share some of that in more detail with you tomorrow during like if you ask me about my testimony tomorrow. But suffice it to say, I was in a place of complete doubt. And just like that, it was through years of struggle and darkness. It was not through my own efforts, through my own reason, through my own ignorance, but out of my darkness, out of my despair, God reached down and he planted the seed of faith into my heart. And one moment I didn't believe in God, and especially Jesus, and the next moment I did, and I believed in him ever since. And that's why I make such a big emphasis, like Augustine, that it's the gift of God, because I did everything in my power, intellectually, physically, mentally, spiritually, to try to pull God out of the heavens, and I couldn't. And it took God reaching down and giving me that belief. And that belief that I had kind of inherited as a child and took for granted now became my most valuable possession. This belief did not come through my heritage, truth-seeking, devotion, or reason. It was like a seed planted in the depths of my very being that gave me absolute peace and assurance that Jesus was God, and he gave himself as an atoning sacrifice for me. And atoning, that's a big Christianese word we use, but it literally means Jesus paid the price of my sin, the debt of my sin, which was death. This seed of faith became my most precious possession, and I have never doubted God's existence or providence since that day. What started as a simple belief in God and his love for me has grown into a tree of faith. And that's all I believed in. I believed in God and that Jesus was his son and God in the flesh. That's all I believed. I didn't believe in the Bible. I didn't believe in the church. I didn't believe in other people. All I believed in was God and Jesus, but that was the seed. And then from that, it's grown just like a tree every year. And it goes through seasons. And one of your staff was telling me you had a speaker talk about our spiritual life is like a season. And that's so true. I mean, sometimes our tree is like full of fruit and we're able to bless others. We can provide shade and shelter. And other times we feel like we just don't have strength. We're losing our leaves. Winter comes on, we feel barren, and then spring comes again, and there's blossoms and blooms and new life and new growth. And the spiritual life is like that. It oscillates. It goes through these different cycles and seasons. The difference, however, is even in the depths of my most wintry times in my life, I've never felt forsaken or abandoned by God. I mean, those roots still run deep. Tyler? Yes.
What was that experience like? I mean, was it just a feeling you had? Because I'm thinking if it's a feeling, how could you trust that that was really, actually God?
I had feelings about it, but it was not generated by my feelings. And I had rational thoughts about it, but it did not come from my reason. And that's a mistake I think a lot of people make. A lot of conservative, analytic Christians think faith comes through reason, and a lot of more charismatic Pentecostal Christians equate faith with feeling or emotion, and I think they're both missing the point. I believe it's separate from both of those, and it's more akin to like a direct intuition or knowing. Now, if you're a more rational, analytic person, you're probably going to describe it to other people in a more rational way, and if you're more emotive, you'll probably express it in a more emotive way. But the key is, it's not coming from the emotions or the reason. It's coming from God, and then it can be expressed in different ways. No. That's an excellent question. And once again, see, and that's what Nietzsche's talking about. He's just like, wishful thinking. You wanted there to be a God so bad, you conjured one up because you couldn't live with yourself not having a God. And that's a fair critique. But I was so committed to being honest and not making a false God just so I could sleep at night. I don't believe I did that. And other people can say I did that, and that's fine, but the core of my being and my life is God reaching down and revealing himself to me. And that's what I'm going with. And my friends, in fact, when I told them of my experience, they said, that's nice, Fred. We're so happy for you. But you could tell they were just like, he just couldn't take it. he crumbled. He ran back to his faith of his mommy and his daddy, and he couldn't deal with the truth of there not being a God. Because they were quite comfortable in their atheism and agnosticism because it let them do whatever they wanted to do. And they loved not having some eye in the sky keeping track of their behavior. And for me, that wasn't even the issue. Mine was just this complete feeling of emptiness and loss, feeling like everything was flat and dull and colorless and tasteless. And God made everything come alive. I still don't know a lot of the answers to the questions that tormented me in my youth, especially questions like, if God's such a good God, why is there so much evil in the world? That's the classic problem of evil question, and I don't know if we'll have time to discuss that. I'd love to with you if we can, but I still don't have an answer for that. What changed was not having an answer for why do the innocent suffer or why do bad things happen to good people. What changed was I have a complete trust in God's goodness and holiness and righteousness now. For the first time in my life, I stopped judging and questioning God and started being submissive to his will and his ways. And that was the shift. The shift was in God revealed to me who I was and how incapable I was of even my own happiness, let alone my own salvation. And he showed me who he was, that he was the Lord of all creation. And like Job of old, I didn't get my big philosophical questions answered, like why is this stuff happening to me or to other people? But I did get my perspective adjusted, where I realized God is God and I'm not. And a lot of people think that's a horrible moral to the book of Job, but I think that's the reality. God is God and I'm not. And once I was able to realize that and realize God did not owe me an answer or did not have to give an account to me in order to earn my worship, it changed everything. Okay. I felt like a prisoner who'd been set free, a blind man who'd received his sight. For the first time in my life, I realized I was deserving of death and eternal separation from God. And you might say, how could this be the first time you realized that? You said you were brought up fundamentalist Baptist. You probably learned that in kindergarten, in Sunday school. And I did learn it there. In fact, I still remember as a little kid, the Sunday school teachers would say, okay, everyone, now we all know we're sinners and we deserve to burn forever in hell. But Jesus loved us and died for us so we could go to be in heaven with him. And we would all chant that back to the teachers. But even as a little kid, I remember thinking, come on, I'm like 5 years old. What have I done to deserve to go to hell for all eternity? Whatever that means. But for the first time in my life, I actually felt like I did deserve to be separated from God. Because I think during that time of darkness, I actually began to get a glimpse of my own depravity for the first time. And I realized I literally was capable of anything. And it changed the way I looked at other people. Like at that time, Jeffrey Dahmer was in the news. I don't know if you know of him, but he was like an American cannibal. And he would lure people and back to his apartment and drug them and eat them and keep them, and really creepy. But after this conversion of heart, I was no longer thinking, ew, how could someone do that? I was just like, oh, totally. I so could see how you could go down that path. It's just like baby steps, one little step after the other until the next thing you know, you got somebody's head in your fridge. And it's just like another day. Even though I realized I was highly depraved, I also realized with great joy that Jesus had paid my debt and taken my place. Jesus did through his self-sacrifice what I could never do through my self-effort. This truth resonated within me and became my template for evaluating all other systems of self-correction, improvement, or self-realization. God had done for man what man could not do for himself. For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, lest any man should boast. I felt so free and clean for the first time in my life, and out of this gratitude and love and devotion, I was determined to live for God. God's own Son had died to save me. The least I could do was to live for him. It was so clear to me now that what separated Christianity from all the other religions or ethical systems was that we could never be saved from our alienation from God through our own efforts. Salvation came through divine provision rather than from human accomplishment. All other religions and moral systems had missed the point and would be damned for their self-sufficiency, their self-dependence, and their self-effort. I took my gift of salvation very seriously and was determined to serve and obey God with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength. And this is when the true struggle began. I started off well, full of zeal, vigor, and passion, but as time went on, I found that many of my best intentions came to naught. During my years as a seeker, I had picked up many bad habits and vices, and now that I was part of God's family and his own child, I was determined to let these things go. And I would plead with the Almighty to deliver me and free me from these things, but they had become like my constant companions. I also was a man with the passions of a man. I had sexual desires, sexual urges, and even though I was committed to keeping myself pure before God, it became like a daily struggle. And it seemed like the only way I could deal with these passions within me was to like put my head through a brick wall, sometimes to like momentarily knock myself unconscious to get a little relief. Sometimes these struggles were so great. I mean, it was excruciating. And I would call out to God, and I would develop all these like little exercises and spiritual disciplines and things to try to break myself of these habits. But time and time again, I would fall into my old patterns. I read of the great saints of the desert fathers, the hermits, the monks, and thought through their example, I too might liberate myself from my own internal desires. Like I mentioned, I studied spiritual disciplines, incorporated them into my lifestyle. I was cautious of what I ate and drank, and especially of what I took in with my eyes. And like David, I made a covenant with my eyes not to take in any impure thing. But, I mean, for heaven's sake, I lived in Southern California. How do you not take in any impure things? It's like everywhere, all around us, and it's even worse today. And so this became my struggle. Jesus died for me. The least I could do was to live for him. And this is where I entered the stage of my life that I call the ladder climbing stage. And so if we could bring that ladder up. This picture here, you want to click on that and see if it gets bigger? I don't know if we have a bigger version. No, that doesn't help. Well, I wish I had a big... This was actually developed from the monastery at St. Catherine's. It's at the foot of Mount Sinai. And this is called the Ladder of Divine Ascent. And it was the abbot of the day. His name was Johannes Climacticus. And that means John... Oh, please, Lord, don't let me hurt myself. His name means John the Ladder Climber. Let's get it all the way to heaven. That's how high we want it. We're trying to get to Jesus. So I know you can't see very well in this picture, but here you have all these monks climbing this ladder, and Jesus is at the top, waiting for you, like, come on, I think you can, I know you can. And you have all these like little demons trying to pull people off this ladder as they're trying to get up there. Is anyone feeling kind of squirrely? Really? How about you? You're light. I might be able to catch you if you fall.
I got you, Zach. Don't worry.
Or, okay.
Yeah, Graham.
If I break, it's not as bad.
Okay. We won't get sued if you fall off God's heavenly ladder. Okay. Okay, so what's going on is I feel saved. Jesus has saved me. Oh, don't climb up yet. Yeah, come back down. Sorry. You're so zealous. That's so good. So good. Okay, now get ready. So this became my daily struggle for personal sanctification. What does sanctification mean? Wow, very good. Holiness and perfection. So this is where my head's at. Jesus died for me. Now I need to live for Jesus. So that's the least we could do, right? So by my mid-20s, I'd kind of reached my breaking point. I had been doing this ladder climbing thing. I was exhausted and defeated. It was so frustrating because my life was this cycle of ladder climbing and doing all the do's of Christianity and trying to avoid the bigger list of don'ts. And help me out here, and you can climb with each thing that you guys can help participate. What things can we do to help our lives be more holy or sanctified? What are some spiritual disciplines or practices? Pray. There you go, pray. What about Jesus? Church, good, church. Bible, there's another one. Repentance. How about penance? What's penance? Tithing, good. Oh, God, I'm so glad I'm not up there. Fasting, good. Fasting should almost get 2. Huh? No. Meditation, good. Worship. Okay, you can stop a sec. And so, oh, yes. Yes. The blessedness of celibacy and singleness. That should be worth 3 rungs right there, right? And so what happens is we have all these things and practices, and this is what I was talking about last night with Kierkegaard. We have all these like things we do, Christian things we do, and we have these even bigger lists probably of don'ts. And so, how high are you? You're getting so high. Oh, you're almost to the top. Okay. Okay, go another one will represent the do's, and then we'll have you do one last one for the don'ts, even though the don'ts would be this ladder again. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't chew, don't date women who do, that whole little mantra. And so the problem is, okay, and now this is the tricky part, Graham, because now I need you to fall off the ladder. You can simulate it. Just pretend he's falling, so come fall down at my feet. And so no matter how high I would climb on this ladder of spiritual discipline or sanctification.
Are you going to jump?
No, you just lay down here. Just pretend he's climbed so high, but now he's fallen. He did one of his don'ts, or he didn't do one of his do's, and now he's fallen and he can't get up. And then the evil one is right here, and it says, and you call yourself a Christian. Jesus died for you, and you think those naughty thoughts in your head, or you were so mean to that person who couldn't say Philippians today. What is the matter with you? And so then, okay, that's good. Thank you so much, Graham. And so then at that point, I would tell the devil, okay, devil, I got it from here. And then I would be like, yeah, Fred, that was so gross. Jesus died for me. But if people really could see inside my head or know what I was thinking or my sick, perverse thoughts or how I really felt about them or other people, they would run me out of town on a rail. I would be tarred and feathered. They'd put my head in a guillotine. And so I would commence to beat myself up. I would flagellate myself. Does anyone know what flagellation is? Not flatulation, flagellation. Flagellation is where you beat your body, you buffet your body. If any of you saw the Da Vinci Code, which I'm sure you didn't, but remember that albino monk who had a calice like that metal thing with spikes in it. So when he flexed his thigh, whenever he thought an impure thought, he could just flex his thigh and be like, oh, the lust has gone away. And so you can have all these different practices and techniques to help you try to do your do's and not do your don'ts. So after I never physically beat myself up, but I became a master at psychological flagellation. I would tell myself what a horrible sinner I was. I would just walk around saying, Kyrie eleison, which was, Lord have mercy, forgive me, a miserable sinner. And it's like the monk's prayer. It's just like, God have mercy, Lord have mercy, God have mercy. Even to this day, I can't help it. I'll just be walking, minding my own business, having a normal day, and this horrific thought will come into my head, and I'll just be, God have mercy, Lord have mercy. And it's just so disconcerting because I do love Jesus. I know I love Jesus. He means everything to me, and yet I can't even go a single day without falling off the stupid ladder. And then I feel so bad. And then I got the devil there making me feel even worse. But I'm much better at making myself feel bad than the devil because I know myself better than the devil. And the way I viewed it for years, it was I was being contrite. I was really repentant. I had lots of Christian friends that they would fall off the ladder. I don't even know if they were on a ladder. And they would just be like, oh, Jesus, forgive me, I messed up. And they'd be off on their way like nothing had even happened. And that would make me crazy. I'd be like, you don't even care about your sin, do you? And they'd like, yeah, but Jesus forgave me. I'm just like, yeah, but you're supposed to beat yourself up a little, aren't you? Or let Jesus know you're really sorry. And so that was my pattern for years and years. I would climb and climb. And the thing is, the higher you climb, the more painful it's going to be when you fall. And it just became this pattern of manipulation, shame, and guilt. And I would fall. I would beat myself up. And the way it would affect me is like I'd maybe still go to church, but I couldn't sing the hymns because I didn't want to be a hypocrite, or I couldn't take communion, or I certainly couldn't witness to others, or I certainly couldn't exhort someone else because I had sin in my own life. How can I challenge you if you have sin in your life? And then when I felt like I was doing better, I'd start climbing, and it'd be like, I think I can, and then wham, and then crawling, climbing, falling, crawling, climbing. And you can take the ladder now, but thank you. This became the pattern of my life. Thank you, Graham. That was very, very helpful. I think I would have fallen for real. Although that could have been a good example. What I finally realized, that it wasn't even God I was trying to satisfy by beating myself up, but rather it was my own ego. God already knew. Did you guys catch that? When I would fall and go through all that contrition and self-flagellation and telling myself what a bad person I was, I wasn't doing it for God's benefit. I was doing it for mine, because I was not living up to my own superego ideal of myself. And we all have it. We all have this idea of our best self inside of us. And when we feel guilt and shame, that is because we're not living up to those expectations. Sometimes those come from ourselves. Sometimes it's coming from our society, our church, our mama, whoever. But it's kind of like that super ego inside of us. Is this correct? Super ego, the ideal self? Am I messing up my psychological terms? Yes? No? Okay. Anyways, this ideal self within me, I was falling short of. God was not being impressed by me beating myself up, showing how sorry I was. I was doing it for my benefit, not for God's benefit. And in fact, I even remember telling God when he was trying to comfort me and say, I already forgave you. It's okay. You don't have to beat yourself up. I love you. I'm not loving you any less today than I did yesterday. I don't love you any less when you're flat on the ground than when you thought you were at the top of the ladder. I love you, I love you, I love you. And I'd be like, just stay out of it. Can't you see I'm trying to beat myself up over here so I can be a better person? And what finally happened was, after going through this cycle over and over again and becoming totally exhausted, I finally realized the truth of Romans 6. In fact, what happened was I came to such despair, just like in that poem. It was like now my Christian version of that poem. I just remember crying out to God one night and I said, God, I'm not going to ever reach this perfection and holiness as long as I'm alive. And it was in that context of that brokenness that I came across Romans 6 again. And this to me is the difference between reading Scripture with the illumination of the Holy Spirit and reading it through my own reason. Because I'd read Romans, I don't know how many times. I'd been to Bible college, I'd probably written papers on it, I'd probably exegeted the passage. But this time, the Holy Spirit was illuminating the truth of Romans into my heart. And I'm not neo-Orthodox. I'm not saying the Bible becomes the Word of God when it's illumined. But until it's illumined by the Holy Spirit, I'm just reading it in the strength of my own mind. And now, Jesus was using the Scriptures to change me. Also, and in Romans 6, it talks about, know ye not that you have been crucified with Christ. And I was like, wait a second. I know Jesus was crucified for me, but what's this I've been crucified with Christ part? And I thought, I love the King James, but I know sometimes it gets things a little quirky. And so I started cross-referencing, I started doing word studies, and all of a sudden the entire New Testament lit up of all these passages of how we have died and the life that we now live is in Christ. And it's like, how could I have missed this? And I cannot tell you how liberating that was, because as I had just mentioned, I knew my only way out was death. And here I'm realizing for the first time at probably 25 years of age that Fred is dead. And it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I was working at a boys' group home, and I just wanted to run through the house saying, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. I was so happy. I was so happy. It doesn't mean I never messed up again, and I still did some of my don'ts, and I don't do a lot of my do's all the time, but how I respond to that now is so different. Now I'm like those people that I was so annoyed by. I'm like, thank you, Jesus, so much for forgiving me, and that it's not up to me to climb that ladder of my own sanctification. And then I get on with it, and I don't have to beat myself up because it's not about me anymore. It's not about my ego or my pride or my self-righteousness or me trying to please God. I realize I'm signed, sealed, and delivered. And once I realized that I was sanctified, made holy, and perfected the same way that I was saved, see, I was very clear that works-based righteousness could never happen. But somehow I had made this subtle shift to a works-based sanctification. And it's easy to make, especially if you were brought up in Christian circles, because people are trying to help you live holy lives. They're trying to help you not get those scars of experience or bad habits that come along the way, or STDs or pregnancies or thrown in jail or whatever it happens to be. And so they try to do all these things to help you, but we get confused and we put it all back on us, like, I got to try a little harder, I got to be a little more, I got to do a little more. And it just becomes this massive spiritual workout of something we were never intended to do. We were never intended to provide for our own righteousness. Now when I do my do's and don't do, now when I don't do my do's and do my don'ts? Oh, no. Now when I do my do's and don't do my don'ts, it's because of who I am in Jesus. Let me say that again. Now when I do my do's and don't do my don'ts, it's because of who I am in Jesus. I'm no longer trying to do things or not do things to become something I'm not. I do or don't do things because of who I now am. Jesus, Fred. I still mess up. I still have lots of shortcomings. But now I simply acknowledge my shortcomings and ask Jesus, and this is key for me, I ask Jesus to help me remember who I am. I don't even ask Jesus to help me be a better person anymore or to help me overcome this or that vice or habit. It's simply, Jesus, help me remember who I am, that I am a new creation in you. So before I'm climbing this ladder, or this staircase, to try to reach God's holiness, and I'm just going through this cycle of falling, contrition, trying over and over again, now I realized that God's perfection, because Jesus is in God and I am in Jesus, I'm already there. I don't have to do all these things to be more pleasing to God. And so now when I'm doing these things, reading my Bible, going to church, praying, tithing, fasting, it's an outflow of who I am rather than a struggle or climb to become something I'm not, because this will always end in failure, where this becomes a natural outflow of my new being in Jesus. And it will change everything, I guarantee it. It doesn't mean you won't mess up, but how it affects you and those around you, you will not believe the difference in your life. How I missed that all those years, I do not know. Because I know it was taught in my churches. It's just, I think I just had such a strong ego and such a strong will and was so headstrong and was so into self-discipline. And because, see, the downside with having all those self-disciplines and self-control and even spiritual disciplines is it kind of makes you a better person and you get points and it feeds your ego. And Jesus is very good at humbling us and showing that we cannot do it. So often it's the people that know they're weak and know they can't do it that have it so much easier because, they're just like, God, help me, I'm a sinner. I mean, forgive me. And they're on with it. Where those of us who think we're so good will keep trying and trying and trying and butting our head against that wall and keep going through this cycle. And I pray that God will deliver you from that, if that is the case in your life. When I'm focused on Jesus and who I am in him, all the behavior issues take care of themselves. And I already talked about guilt and shame don't come from God, but rather from us not living up to our own expectations. Conviction comes from God, but with conviction also comes the empowering of the Holy Spirit to effect change in our lives. So I hope that will resonate with you too. If you're feeling guilt and shame in your life, that's an ego trip. Conviction is God pointing out areas in your life that need to change, but with that conviction comes the power to change it. He's not leaving you to your own devices or your own techniques or skills. So if you're feeling guilt or shame, it should be a red flag that this is not from God, but rather from your own ego or your own flesh. If you find yourself judging others, it's probably because you are either out of touch with your own depravity or you are striving so hard to be holy through your own efforts that when you see others not striving, think about it. If you're working so hard to climb this ladder and other people are just lounging around down here, it's really annoying. And that's one of my good red flags to know I'm back on the ladder again, is when I start getting annoyed and judgmental of other people around me. And I think they're not living up to par with how they should be living the Christian life. Because I think I am, and they're not, and I don't like it. Or, I'll get you in just a sec, or if you find yourself beating yourself up and wallowing in despair and shame and guilt, that's the other thing that lets me know, Fred, If I find myself, I keep going over my failings and beating myself up and revisiting them, I realize I'm back on this like cosmic hamster wheel again. And I'm just going through the cycle. And I got to be like, okay, Jesus, I'm going to let it go. I want to beat myself up because for some reason I like it and it makes me happy or sad or miserable, whatever. But I'm getting something out of it and I got to let it go and remember who I am. I mean, you've probably all seen this illustration. Hopefully I won't hurt anyone. If I hurt you, I'm sorry. This is so heavy. No. Well, yeah, I need a lot of help, but no, not that kind of help. Anyway, okay. The thing is, I mean, it sounds so cliche, this idea, keep your eyes upon Jesus, right? But we don't like to do that. We like to keep our eyes on our problems and our issues and our sins and our struggles. And the problem is, if we're down here looking at our sins and problems, we're going to whack ourselves and others in the head with all our mess. But if we keep our eyes on Jesus, even uncoordinated people like me can keep it all together because it's Jesus and our focus. But as soon as we're down here, it's over. Yes, thank you. So here's the advice. Reckon yourself dead daily. When I'm having a good day, that's the first thing I do. When I wake up in the morning, I say, Fred is dead. Remember who you are in Jesus. Abide in the vine and walk in the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. And that is the amazing thing is the way we're created, we can't walk in our own strength and in the Spirit simultaneously. We can either do one or the other. So if you're walking in the Spirit, you won't be walking in the flesh. But if you're walking in the flesh, I guarantee you, the Spirit will be the last thing on your mind. When you fail, acknowledge your failings and ask forgiveness. If your actions have harmed others, apologize to them, and then thank God that He has already covered all your past, present, and future failings. And the last part of this, well, there's two more parts, is the blood and the cross. If you want to pull up that. Where I finally got that oh, go ahead. Yes.
Even in life now, do you still struggle with the fact of walking up that ladder? Is that like a lifelong struggle for you?
Yes, it's my natural disposition to slip into it. Okay. And that's why I have these like red flags. So, and my two red flags are self-condemnation or judging others. And when I catch myself doing either of those two things, beating myself up or beating other people up, that gives me a pretty good idea that somehow I'm back on that ladder. And I got to say like, oh, sorry, Jesus, I forgot who I was in you. Because as soon as I remember this, all the self-condemnation and judging of others evaporates like the mist, because I'm walking in the light of the sun again. Yes?
So when you say like self-condemnation, you mean you're bashing yourself for something that you did, but isn't that sort of like conviction from the Holy Spirit? Or?
Never. That's guilt and shame. And that's coming from you not living up to your own standards. Conviction will point out wrong behavior, but with it, it will show the love of God and who you are in Him. Guilt and shame don't do that. In fact, the problem with guilt and shame is we start feeling so bad about ourselves, we'll often go right back to the things that cause the guilt and shame to begin with, to like self-medicate or self-soothe what's causing the guilt and shame, whether that's sexual addiction, drug addiction, alcohol, video games, it could be anything, food, and And then we feel bad about it, and so that we do more of it to make the bad feelings go away, and then it's just that horrible cycle. And that's not how conviction works. Conviction might show us that, hey, you know, that's really kind of abusive to your body or the temple that I want you to minister in, but there's not that beating yourself up about it. It's an empowerment. And I'm not saying it won't be a lifelong struggle. There's some things I still struggle with today that I struggled with 20 years ago. And some days I do really well, and others days I'm just bowled over by it. And I know this might sound like a rationalization or excuse. We might have to edit this, but I call it the ministry of sin in my life. And I'm not trying to make an excuse for sin, but the effect it has on me, it keeps me ever so humble. And I ran out of stones to throw at other people a long time ago because I threw them at myself because I'm so messed up in so many ways. And when I see that in myself, it makes me want to be so much more compassionate to other people. And it makes me realize how dependent I am on God. I mean, I cannot tell you the daily struggles I have. It's like I come to these forks in the road multiple times a day where one path leads to life and the other leads to destruction. And when I'm walking in the Spirit, I so easily walk the path of life. And when I'm walking in the flesh, I do the most self-destructive things you can imagine. And it's such a bizarre phenomena to me. But I can talk more about that later too, if you want, because that's like a whole nother aspect. Yes.
When you're talking about like not judging people and like there's being like, oh, I don't about like there's like spiritual walk and stuff and being like I shouldn't look at that person and say they should be here. But at the same time, like it's so hard to keep like, because isn't there also like in community and stuff a place for accountability and like calling each other out on truth and stuff. But at the same time, it's so hard to be like, am I judging that person, thinking that they should be in this like place, or am I calling out like their potential?
Yes. And unfortunately, once again, it's a language problem. We make thousands of judgments every day. Like, I made a judgment of what I would wear tonight. I weighed the pros and cons of different outfits in my wardrobe, what would be most effective with my beard. I mean, all these sorts of things. And those were value judgments I was making. I went through a lot of judgment process of what I was going to speak on tonight, weighing the pros and cons and where I thought you guys were and what would be most helpful or those sorts of things. And when I see people doing harmful behavior to themselves or others, I make judgments like, that's a harmful behavior to yourself and others. I really think when it's talking about not judging other people, it's the judgment in the sense of a condemnation, like, I hope God burns you for that, or I hope you pay for that, or I hope you reap the full calamity of your evil or that you're causing to other people. That's what I believe it's talking about. Not that we shouldn't call sin a sin, and we should, especially people we have a relationship with. I mean, if we care about them, we should say, you're going to hurt yourself or you're going to hurt others. And I think that's done out of love. Condemnation is done out of hate, really, and fear, and it's not done out of compassion. And that's what I think we're to avoid, that sort of judgmental condemnation where we want other people to get what they deserve. It's not the way of grace. It's the way of retribution. It's the way of the law. Yep.
So is that where you get that difference between condemnation and conviction?
No. Different topic. Although they might tie in. If I think about it, I bet we could make a connection.
Because like one deals with, I guess like you said,
That's good, yes.
passion, and then the other one deals with more like fear and hatred.
Right. So a conviction would be a righteous judgment and showing the need for change, where condemnation would be tied up in that guilt and shame. That's very good. That's a good connection. I didn't see that. Okay. All right. Yes.
How would you like balance that like with the desire for justice then, I guess, like because shouldn't we still want to see justice done
I mean, I'm just not a big fan of justice anymore. Do you know why?
No, I know that, yeah. I mean,
Because I don't want justice. I want mercy. I'm such a big fan of mercy. And when I have the chance to give mercy to someone else, I am so excited to be able to do that. Now, do I want God to be just? Yes. And I have complete trust in his justice, but my hope is not in God's justice. My hope is in his mercy. I think justice is a good and holy thing. I just don't want it because of what it would do to me. But that I'm going to talk more about that too, of why Jesus is so crucial in that reconciliation process, because it fulfills God's justice and mercy. But I'm on the mercy bus now. Yeah. Yes.
If you have someone who's using you because they know that you're someone who gives mercy, what do you do in that kind of situation if you're all about that mercy life, but you say you don't care for justice? Like, how do you hold true, kind of what you were saying, right? But they say about justice, like, where's the point where you stand up either for yourself or when it talks about casting people out of the church for living lives and not responding to correction? Like, where's the line you draw on that? Of, okay, I can't do anything anymore.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a brief answer, but if, like, tomorrow you want to go more in depth, I'd be happy to. I think there's a real difference between discipline and punishment. Punishment is just. It's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a blow for blow, life for life. It's pure justice. You reap what you sow. Discipline is where you correct people's behavior out of love. And so when you talk about church discipline, it's supposed to be motivated out of love and that the people will change and come back to God. Church punishment would be giving people what they deserve. And I don't believe we're instructed to do church punishment. But that's exactly what happens. We do shunning, we cut people off, we ostracize them, we talk badly about them, and that is not the way of the cross. Does that answer the question enough for now?
Yeah.
Okay. This is from Watchman Nee, and he wrote a book called The Normal Christian Life. And I probably had it in my library for a decade, but I never read it because I thought it was a book for beginners. And I don't know why. I decided to read it one day. And that's where I saw all that talk about Romans 6 and that I had been crucified with Christ. And this little one-liner is so profound to me. He says, the blood procures our pardon of what we have done. That's the atonement. Just like in the Old Testament where they offered the sacrifice of sheep for the covering of sins. It was like a type, a foreshadowing of what Christ would do for us. So Christ's blood has covered our sins. So when God sees us, he sees his own son, the righteousness of Christ. In fact, that's one of my favorite passages. If someone could look that up, the last verse in 2 Corinthians 5. I hope that's where it is. The blood procures our pardon for what we have done. The cross procures our deliverance from what we were. And somehow I missed that part. I got the salvation part. I missed the being delivered from Fred part. And that's why we have to die to self. It's not just that Jesus died for us, but we also were crucified with him. Someone have that? Last verse, yeah.
it says, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God.
What a trade-off. Christ, who had no sin, became sin for us, and in exchange, we got the righteousness of Jesus. So it's not the result of our workout or our effort or our self-discipline or best intentions. It's the perfect person and work of Jesus, who, when God sees us, he sees us through Jesus' filter, and we are clean. entirely. Yes?
What do you do with verses on sanctification that seem to like point to some type of like synergistic kind of like quoting or event that what better salvation if you're complete or is God who acts morally for the purpose? So it's like this idea of like it seems like there's some responsibility for us. Is that acting like not talking the ladder but just saying like Jesus show me I'm dead? Is that you like is that how you interpret acting or what in that sense?
Yeah, let me do that at the end if I can, because that could get really involved really quickly. But you are correct. Okay. Galatians 2:20. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Colossians 3:3. For you are dead, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Romans 6:6 and 7. Knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. For he that is dead is free from sin. And when that resonated, when the Holy Spirit showed that to me, I realized I was free for the first time in my life. That because I was dead, I was free. That is what finally clicked for me, and perhaps where East meets West. I got the justification part down, that it was Jesus' blood atonement that covered my sins and made me righteous. Unfortunately, I was under the impression that I was like a criminal who had caught a lucky break. And you've probably all heard that analogy. God is the ultimate judge of the universe. The wages of sin is death. We've all sinned. We all deserve to die. And so we're being condemned by God Almighty. And the judge's son, Jesus, steps in and he says, Father, I'll take the penalty upon myself. So God is still able to be just and righteous, but he is also able to give mercy and compassion through the person of Jesus. And that should help you remembering the cross. It's justice and mercy, another opposites combined in one person, in one act on the cross. And where God reconciles himself to man. And so what I was under the impression was, I catch this lucky break, I don't have to pay the penalty for my sin, and the judge is like, man, you caught a lucky break, go and sin no more. And that was my problem. It was like I left the courtroom and I was like, yay, I got off, I'm free, thank you, Jesus. But then I tried to live out a Christian life through the strength of my own efforts. And it was complete foolish madness. And what I missed was the judge didn't just say, my son died for you, you're free. And it is true to say that Jesus came to save us, but it's equally true to say Jesus came to slay us. And let me say that again. Jesus saves, but it's equally true, Jesus slays. And he has come to put you to death, because it is only through death that you can be free from the law and united with him. And so out of death comes life. Another paradox. So I'm telling you, paradoxes are the little flags that tell you you're getting close to those profound truths. It is in dying that we truly begin to live. So I didn't leave the courtroom alone. I left in the very person of Jesus. Or you could say, Jesus left with me, inside of me. And I've never been alone since. And that's why I'm very comfortable calling myself Fred Jesus, or Jesus Fred, as opposed to Adam Fred. I had tried to take on a task I was never meant to handle, the idea of living a righteous life in my own strength. I can no more live for Jesus than I could provide for my own righteousness before God. It is precisely because I'm dead and my life is not my own that I now can live a life that is pleasing to God, because my new life is in his Son. I am a new creation. All things have become new. I correctly understood that I could not justify myself before God, but foolishly thought I could sanctify myself. and live a good and honoring life because I love God so much. The reality was I could am I repeating myself? Maybe I need to. The reality was I could no more sanctify myself than I could justify myself. I understood that salvation was by the grace through God given by faith, but I had unwittingly engaged in a works-based sanctification. What foolish madness. Thank God that I am dead, and the life that I now live is in the one who gave himself for me. And this is where I get the dead have no need of ethics. It is out of this context that I begin to finally see the disconnect between my spiritual understanding of the good and what it meant to live a righteous life and my academic intellectual understanding of ethics and morality. I expected to find flaws in the ethical systems created by men, but I thought, at least in Christian ethics, I would see the way of the cross. Many great theologians and spiritual leaders had written on Christian ethics, yet the more I read their works, the more disturbed I became at what I found. The vast majority of Christian ethics is really nothing more than new and improved Judaism or Islam, with like a grace safety net in case you mess up. And I was just thinking, it's just the law part 2. And I was like, how can this happen? How can this be? Christian ethics, for all intents and purposes, was just another take on the divine command theory. And I have a series of ethics videos. If you ever want to watch those, you can find them off this website. And I do a pretty strong critique on the divine command theory and why it's completely unlivable. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just think we can't live it. The only person that can live out that sort of ethic is God himself, because it's a perfect standard. God's commands are good, God's prohibitions are evil, with the exception being that now we had Jesus to show us God's mercy and forgiveness instead of just having God's justice and judgment. I was finally in the place in my life, in my little journey, where I accepted the presuppositions of Christianity. So Christian ethics seemed like the logical choice for right conduct. I believed God exists. I believe he made his will known to us through general and special revelation. I believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God and authoritative for doctrine, correction, and reproof. God's very own will revealed to us. I believed I had the tools to interpret God's will and word correctly, at least after much prayer, counsel, and study. Yet the more I studied God's standard of right conduct, even in the context of Christian ethics, an awful realization came upon me. Jesus, rather than taking the edge off the Old Testament law, made it even more severe. Because in the Old Testament law, as long as you were keeping the outward form, you could stay in community of faith. But Jesus went after the heart and the intention. In the Old Testament law, it said, "Thou shalt not murder." Jesus now equates hating our brother with the act of killing. The Old Testament told us not to commit adultery. Jesus now equates lustful thoughts with lustful actions. And so it becomes very, very difficult. Do you mind getting me just a little more water? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "I have not come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, not one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled." The law of Moses tells us that thou shalt not kill, and then I went on with those examples. Jesus tells us in the past we were told, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. Jesus tells us to love our enemies, to bless them that curse you, to love them and pray for them that despitefully use you. Matthew 5 ends with Jesus' standard for right living. And it's a high standard. "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Jesus is showing us once again that God's law and standard for righteous living is perfection. The only person who can live out a Christian ethic is Christ. Get any more amens? Just one little amen. Let me say that one more time. The only person who can live out a Christian ethic is Christ. And that should cause you ultimate despair and ultimate thankfulness at the same time. Because if you're trying to work it out yourself, you should be in great despair. But if you realize, like in that passage we read in 2 Corinthians 5, that you have the righteousness of Christ, you have it. You are already perfect in God's eyes. If the doctrine of salvation and sanctification are both dependent on the grace and righteousness of God rather than the efforts and intentions of men, then why is Christianity so obsessed with rules and places like the Joshua Institute? Oh, let me see. I mean, you guys have a few rules here, right? You guys have some really crazy rules here, right? Do you guys still do that like odd rule? First time I saw that, that just blew my little mind. But I like it. It's kind of like a Christian boot camp sort of thing. Different Christians use proof texts to try and conform the scriptures. You hear this? They try to conform the scriptures to their idea of right and wrong, rather than letting the scriptures demonstrate that all come short of any standard of righteousness. And this is what I call cherry picking the Bible. People love to go through the Old Testament and cherry pick the rules they want to hold other people to, and then give a pass to the ones that they don't want to be accountable to. Like, I know a lot of people that their bodies are covered in tattoos, but they are willing to blast homosexuals. And they will pull up those examples from the Old Testament where God condemns homosexuality, and I'll show them. In fact, Leviticus 19, it's like a synopsis of the law. So if you want to see all the highlights in one place, just read through Leviticus 19. It's the same passage that tells you it's an abomination to have relations with menstruating women as it is with homosexuals, as it is to have tattoos, as it is to trim your beards. Did you know that's wrong to trim your beards? Okay. Amen. That's how I tell if people are walking with Jesus. Okay, yes. Different Christian sects love to pick and choose the laws they want to keep. Besides the Big Ten, the Ten Commandments, there are over 613 commandments in the Old Testament. While Christianity proclaims we are not under the law but under grace, it seems to be obsessed with creating new rules and guidelines, just like the Jews of old. God gave the law to Moses. Religious thinkers gave us the commentary. God told us to keep the Sabbath. Religious fanatics told us how far we could walk, how much we could carry, and what needed to be avoided. Christian ethics, by and large, have tended to be a Christ-centered self-improvement program. Rules and guidelines are laid down to promote good behavior and discourage evil actions. Many Christians like to make hedges or buffers between God's prohibitions and ourselves. And I'll just give you one, maybe two examples, because time has flown on me. This was the story of my life growing up with the fundamentalist. It was like Hedge City. And a hedge, let me use the example of alcohol. If you're familiar with the scriptures, what is quite clear from scripture is that you are not to be drunk. Thou shalt not be drunk. Okay. So that is the law, that is the commandment, that is God's divine will or plan that he's communicated through the prophets and through the scriptures. And so here's the law. And what a hedge is, it's like, well, if the law is here, in order not to get drunk, let's put a hedge here and say, do you guys know what a hedge is? we're not in England, so we don't have like hedgerows, but it's like an impenetrable like fence or something. It's difficult to go over. It's not impassable, but you got to work at it to get over a hedge. Okay, so a lot of people will make a hedge and say, well, let's not do like strong drink, like hard alcohol. So no hard alcohol. Is that close for alcohol? Okay. And some people will say, yeah, okay, well, that's a good hedge. But other people will say, well, maybe we should have a hedge that says no wine, because even though it's not hard alcohol, it's kind of easy that one bottle leads to another, and then another, and another, and the next thing you know it, you're drunk. So maybe we should avoid wine and just stick to like beer. So they have another hedge, and they say, let's just drink beer. Or they'll say, well, let's only drink at social gatherings like weddings or funerals or something like that. Or aren't any of you Irish in here? Okay. You drink at funerals, right? Okay, that's what I thought. So social, and then the people I grew up with, we had so many hedges it went off the board, where the final hedge was don't even give the appearance of drinking. Like my mother would tell me when she was a young girl, they'd go to weddings and stuff, and she has never touched a drop of alcohol in her life. In fact, she has a mantra that says, lips that touch wine shalt not touch mine, or something like that. And it's just like, really, Mother? Is really? And she's like, yes. And so she told me when she was a young girl, she was at this wedding, and everyone was making a toast with champagne, and my grandmother said, just put some ginger ale in your glass so people will think you're celebrating. And she's like, I do not want people to think I have champagne in my glass. That's the whole point. And it went so far that I wasn't even allowed as a child to go to stores that sold alcohol. Like when I was a kid, you had specific like liquor stores that sold liquor, and then regular grocery stores that sold everything else. Unfortunately, when I was a little kid, all the regular stores were closed on Sunday, and only the stores of the devil were open. And I remember we lived 3 miles from the closest store, and I drove my bike down to the store. I just wanted a soda and some candy. And I got to the market, and I forgot it was Sunday, and it was closed. And my dad told me, don't you ever go into that store of the devil. They sell alcohol in there. And I was like, okay, Dad. And I'm just thinking, it's 3 miles. Who's going to know? So I go in, I come out with my little brown bag with my soda, and who's in the parking lot but my all-seeing, all-knowing Father. And he's like, get in the car. And I was just like, oh, no. And he's like, what will people think, you coming out of that store with that brown paper bag? And I'm like, I'm 8 years old. I don't think they're going to think anything. But see, the problem was when I grew up, these hedges became, these traditions of men became equal with the authority of the law of God. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. And I'm not opposed to hedges. If you struggle with alcohol, that might be a really good hedge for you. Don't even be around bars or social events or people that are going to entice you into that. If you have a struggle with lust and graphic images, I mean, maybe you don't need a coffee table book of nudes or, naked mermaid wallpaper in the bathroom or whatever. I mean, you might need to have some hedges. And that might be perfectly fine for someone else, but you need to have some boundaries or guidelines. I was talking to someone, I remember Billy Graham had really strong hedges too. I think he vowed never to be alone with a woman that wasn't his wife. And whether that was in a taxi or an elevator or a conference room, things that most of us wouldn't even think of and might think is ridiculous, that was important to him. And I don't think it was because he was afraid his lust would overcome him and he would attack them or something. I just think he wanted to be beyond reproof. He didn't want any accusations of impropriety. And so he had those. So I'm not saying hedges are wrong, but when that becomes your standard of righteousness by how many hedges you have and how far out you can keep the world, see, that's what I'm talking about, that sort of bastion sort of mentality. And I'm wrapping this up. I'm sorry this is going long. I'm not really sorry. If you want to look up the passages that go with that, Colossians 2, just read the whole passage. Galatians 2. I'm going to read this one, and then I'll bring it all home. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith of Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law, no flesh shall be justified. But if we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves are also found sinners. Is therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. And this is the kicker, Galatians 2:20. For I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the grace of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And that's how I would answer the toggle. It's like a toggle switch, Tyler, in the mind. When you talked about, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And it seems like we have a part of that. But I really believe it's only by having Jesus in us that is even possible, to have that ability to be yielded to God. And it's not something we can do through our own will, because if it was, we'd get the credit for letting Jesus, even like in John 15, where he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Abide in me and you will bear much fruit. I do not believe we can abide in God without Jesus in us abiding in himself. And last picture.
The computer can't keep up, Fred. It died.
Okay. The last picture. Oh, the last part, verse 21. For I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness came by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. If we could be saved by our own efforts, Jesus didn't need to die. We just need to get cracking. But we can't do it. And Jesus had to die because we never could have done it. And the last picture I have is just this man with Jesus coming up behind him, clothing him with a robe. And the whole point of ethics and morality is to live a life based on right conduct. The same issues that affect our attempts at trying to sanctify ourselves apply to any attempts to live an ethical and moral life. We are trying to reform ourselves, or in the case of most Christian ethics, asking God to make us better people and to help us overcome our deficiencies. And think about how you pray when you're struggling. It's like, Jesus, please help me be a better person. Please help me be more kind, be more patient, be more loving. Jesus, help me. And it's just kind of like, no, you're missing the whole point. It's not about you and being a better person. Salvation isn't an ethical stain removal service that we stop by and get a touch up every now and again when we feel soiled. But that's how many of us live our Christian's life. It's like, ooh, I got dirty. I thought a bad thought, or I was mean to my little brother, and we're like, hey, Jesus, could you get rid of this little stain? It's not making my outfit look so hot today. And it's just like, no. Salvation is rather having our soiled garment burned in the furnace and having it replaced by a stain-proof garment. Mortality is exchanged for immortality, and our carnal mind for the very mind of Christ. Saved is a Christian cliche, but if you ask many Christians what they're saved from, they're probably going to say, oh, I'm saved from hell. The more I meditate on this, I think what I'm saved from is myself. The divine solution for sanctification is the same solution for ethics and morality. The only way out is death. Death frees us from the law, and it frees us from ourselves. Jesus did come to save us, but he also came to slay us. Yet he didn't leave us dead, but quickened our very spirits, and we now find newness of life in him. And this is the conclusion of the matter. Because I am dead, I no longer need ethics or morality. Because I am dead, I no longer have to try to live up to some impossible standard. Because I am dead, I am no longer a slave of sin. Because I am dead, I am no longer a part of the Adamic race. Death is the end of self and the beginning of newness of life in Christ. Because I am alive in Christ, my actions are an outflow of who I am rather than an attempt to become something I'm not. Because I am alive in Christ, I now have perfect righteousness. Because I am now alive in Christ, I am a partaker of the divine nature. And we can talk more about that later if you would like. Old things have passed away, all things have become new. Ethics, religion, and morality are for those who are still striving for self-correction and self-perfection. They all reek of the ways of Cain and are a slap in the face to the finished work of Christ. Because I am dead, I no longer have need of such things, for my salvation and sanctification are found in the one who gave himself for me, and my hope, peace, and righteousness are all found in him. That is why the dead have no need of ethics. And may that resonate and become a truth in your lives. May God bless you and keep you. All right.